Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really profound and honestly ultimately inspiring journey, the story of the babaylan and the Baki. Now, these folks weren't just the ancient spiritual leaders of the Philippines, they were the absolute core of their communities. We're talking about a seamless weaving together of agriculture, spirituality, and get this, gender fluidity way before the devastating impacts of colonization hit. So let's jump right in. To really grasp the true depth of this cultural erasure, we actually have to start by asking ourselves a pretty heavy question. What exactly happens when a sacred, revered title is violently twisted into a derogatory slur? How does a whole society just lose its healers? And more importantly, how do they even begin to find them again?
The ancient spiritual leaders, the divine and the fluid.
Okay, so let's clearly define who we're actually talking about here. Down in the Visayas, you had the babaylan, and then high up in the Cordillera Mountains, the Baki. These individuals were, quite literally, the ultimate polymaths of the pre-colonial era. They weren't just up there leading prayers. They were the essential healers, the agricultural guides, and the living keepers of oral history. They acted as the main intermediaries between everyday folks and the spirit world, and they operated as total equals to the noble ruling class, keeping the power dynamics of the tribe perfectly balanced.
And there is just this wild, stark contrast in how these pre-colonial societies viewed identity compared to what we're used to today. The pre-colonial Bisaya actually used inherently gender-neutral language, fully embracing fluid identities as just a natural part of everyday life. It really wasn't until a rigid, heteronormative patriarchy was imposed by the West that sexual preferences were strictly labeled and policed. In their ancient worldview, having both feminine and masculine energies meant you were directly linked to the divine.
And this fluidity wasn't just some theoretical concept. It was a lived, everyday reality. Male shamans, who were sometimes called azog, were fully integrated into what was traditionally a female role. They would actually undergo symbolic gender transformations, taking on the dress and mannerisms of women to perfectly balance out those masculine and feminine energies. Doing this allowed them to tap into just immense power. They were deeply respected for channeling divine healing, totally celebrated, and never, ever othered by their own people.
Now, stepping into that kind of power wasn't exactly a casual career choice. It was a grueling calling that usually kicked off with a truly terrifying trial called the shamanic sickness. A person might experience intense tremors, vivid visions, or even literally vanish into the woods to commune with spirits. And surviving that was just step one. What followed was an incredibly rigorous 7-stage apprenticeship. It started with baratan, which is forging that initial, fragile connection to a spirit guardian, and then moved into years of mastering complex herb lore, sacred chants, and rituals. Only after surviving this entire gauntlet would they reach banawangan. That's where the village elders officially recognized the apprentice and presented them with a sacred shell cord, basically cementing their status as a fully fledged healer.
Bridging the spirit worlds. Navigating this ancient cosmology was incredibly dangerous work for a babaylan. They had to figure out exactly where a sick person's astral soul had been taken. Was it snatched by epidemic-causing spirits way up in the Ibabanon, the upper world? Was it lost among the invisible dwellers of the Dutanon, the middle world? Or, worst-case scenario, was it dragged down to the Idadalmanon, the lower world, by the Deathbringers? Appeasing these specific deities required highly complex offerings. We're talking about presenting groups of exactly 7 black or red chickens at very precise moments. No pressure, right? Literally one wrong move and the soul could be lost forever.
Rhythms of the land, the Ifugao agricultural cycle.
Meanwhile, up in the mountainous Cordillera region, survival and spirituality are totally locked together. Those breathtaking rice terraces, they aren't just farming plots. They're entirely sacred landscapes. Every single phase of rice cultivation is strictly governed by a Baki, or ceremonial prayer, which is dictated by this incredibly intricate agricultural calendar. From planting the very first seed to bringing in the final harvest, the Baki acts as the ultimate timekeeper. Nature and culture are basically bound together in this rhythm that has kept these communities alive for centuries. These rituals are literally the heartbeat of the community. You start with hanga for sowing the seeds, then move into ahitu node for transplanting, lodona for meticulous weeding, and finally ahi ani for the harvest. And these aren't quiet, solemn prayers. They feature epic, booming oral traditions like the hudhud chants that just echo right across the terraces. The whole cycle then culminates in the punak. This is a highly symbolic, massive river tugging contest using a thick vine-like rope and a wooden effigy.
The sheer, raw, physical energy of this tug-of-war is designed to literally wash away and cleanse the community of any misfortune, making sure the next cycle brings total abundance.
Colonization and erasure. But, tragically, this beautiful, harmonious balance between nature, fluid gender expressions, and the spirit world just did not last. The timeline of this erasure was absolute and honestly brutal. In the 16th century, Spanish missionaries arrived, initially exploiting the native hospitality, but their pivot to systematic destruction was terrifyingly swift. Sacred ancient trees were hacked to the ground. Children were actually brainwashed and commanded to defile the idols of their own ancestors. And when the shaman bravely resisted, the violence escalated to horrific levels. The colonizers publicly whipped, burned, and impaled these revered healers, completely rewriting their history. The surviving babaylan were painted not as divine intermediaries, but as unholy, unbaptized devil worshippers.
This systematic campaign of fear-mongering and forced heteronormativity was so complete that it fundamentally altered the native language itself. Just think about the immense tragedy of this linguistic devolution. The very word babaylan, a title that once meant a divine, powerful healer, devolved into the word bayot. And today, bayot is used as a deeply derogatory slur against effeminate queer men. It is the living, breathing embodiment of inherited colonial trauma. It's literally a word weaponized to force generations into hiding the exact divine feminine energy that their ancestors once celebrated.
Modern threats and rebirth. But look, the story definitely doesn't end in defeat. The continuity of the Baki and their sacred rice rituals does face immense modern challenges today. It's this very real daily struggle between ancient preservation and modern survival. We're seeing massive, unpredictable climate shifts completely disrupting those ancient agricultural calendars. Combine that with changing economic realities, like younger generations migrating to cities for wage labor and education, plus the spread of modern religions that actively condemn the Baki, and the transmission of this profound knowledge is in serious jeopardy.
Conservationists today know full well that they can't just repair old stone walls and expect to save the terraces. They have to preserve the culture that actually sustains them. This preservation is built on 4 core pillars. Tawhid honors the intergenerational heritage value. Tanud ensures the economic survival of the people. Kiowan maintains the crucial social glue of community solidarity. And Tugun fiercely protects that indigenous knowledge. By focusing on these specific values, the community is fighting tooth and nail to keep both their physical landscape and its intangible spiritual heart beating. And on an individual level, the reclamation of this history is incredibly profound. As the artist Mark Konako puts it, we learn who we are by unlearning who our invaders taught us to be. I mean, wow. In the face of centuries of inherited trauma, younger generations are doing the brave, incredibly hard work of looking back. They are actively unlearning colonial shame to boldly reclaim their indigenous queer identities and their ancestral knowledge. They are finally remembering that they descend from the divine. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. What parts of your own history, or maybe the labels that have been given to you, might you need to unlearn to discover who you truly are? The resilience of the babaylan and the Baki proves that while history can certainly be buried, the truth of who we are always has a way of surviving. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope this helps you look at both history and maybe yourself a little bit differently today.